So we're gonna have some fun today. I'm gonna start with a little bit of a story. I'm gonna prep you a little bit. This message today, without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, is applicable to 100% of the people in this room. Like sometimes, you come in and you're like, hey, that's a great reminder. I'm not really dealing with that right now. Today's gonna be different. I'm just telling you, like today, every single one of us, myself included, the people singing and playing the instruments, the people in the booth, the people in the kids areas, all over, like every person that struggles with this. And it's just a battle that we face. Okay, so I'm gonna start with a little story and then we'll get into it, because I think this really kind of helps us see. I need to do a little survey of the room really quick, so I know I need to get a little demographic help here. And so if you would call yourself a sneakerhead, will you raise your hand? If you don't know what that means, that's fine. Keep them up just so I can see who I'm dealing with, okay? I know a few of you, I know because we talk about this stuff. Okay, if you are somebody who really likes shoes, raise your hand, okay? You wouldn't call yourself a sneakerhead, but you like shoes, okay? If you've ever stood in line for a pair of shoes, raise your hand. Like waited outside the mall, waited for the store to open, okay? We got a few. All right, so on one level or another, y'all are my people, okay? I used to have a problem. At one point, I had 150 pairs of sneakers, okay? I didn't think it was a problem. I still don't, but some would say, hey, you got a problem, right? Hey, I wore every pair, right? It was great. But I did work at a shoe store, and so it was easy access, and I didn't have any bills at the time. I didn't have any kids or anything. I just spent my money on shoes, right? And I kind of grew up in the era of Michael Jordan. Anybody else? Late 80s, early 90s. You kind of, especially young men, you grew up, you're watching, you idolize this guy, and you're like, man. And then he was the first one that kind of put sneakers on the map. You know what I'm saying? Like nobody really had a shoe. Some guy named Chuck Taylor, right? Nobody knows who that is. But that was the original, that was the basketball shoe, right? Then Jordan comes on the scene, and now every kid all over the planet wants to wear what? Jordans. Everybody wants Jordans. Anybody got on Jordans today? You don't have to raise your hand. I spotted you on the way in. I know, okay? I saw every pair that walked in. So this story is, I'm gonna take you back several years. 20 plus years ago, I was 15, 16 years old, and there was a special Jordan that was releasing, and it was about the time that the movie Space Jam had come out. Anybody remember that? Okay, Space Jam, the original, okay? The original. And they released this shoe, and it was maybe 94, 95, 96, somewhere in that ballpark. And the shoe was called, it wasn't in the movie, and so that's why people get confused, but it was called Jordan 11 Space Jams. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Anybody have no clue what this shoe looks like? Okay, I'm wearing them. So if you want to know, this is a Jordan 11 Space Jam, okay? These shoes released in the mid-90s. And I was a 15, 16-year-old at the time, and I wanted these shoes so bad, but it just wasn't happening, It just wasn't in the cards for me at the time. So I missed out on them. Several years later, actually about 20 years later, that there's a thing that comes out, and now I got my own money, I can buy my own shoes, right? And now I'm okay, they say, hey, we're gonna re-release the Jordan 11 Space Jam. And I'm no doubt about it, I'm getting this shoe, right? I missed out on it 20 years ago. If this sounds ridiculous to you, you probably got something that in your life that you've done this with, so don't judge me, okay? Just because it's shoes. So I go, you know what? I'm gonna get this shoe. So I go to the mall, and I go to the shoe store, and I enter what's called a raffle. This sounds ridiculous to you non-shoe people, I know. But you had to put your name on a raffle ticket, enter it into a jar, and on the day of the release, they would draw names out of the jar, and they would call you and let you know, hey, you won the raffle. And all that meant was you didn't get a free pair of shoes. It meant, hey, we're gonna let you in early to buy your shoes. So you still have to pay full price for them. You don't get a discount. It's just a raffle, because at the time, people were getting jumped in parking lots for shoes. People were getting robbed for shoes. It was crazy for over these Jordans, right? Now it's not so much like that. It's a little bit like that in some areas. But this is a whole thing back then. And so I get the call. They say, hey, you won the raffle. And I'm man, I'm going to be the first dude in Decatur with these shoes. This is 20 years ago I missed out. Now it's redemption, right? I'm going to get these shoes. And so I go to the mall, I go in, they had this thing like set up where the security was at the door, and then you went in at 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning before the mall opened. They walked you to the store, you went in one at a time, got your shoes, the security would walk you back out of the mall, and then from there you're on your own, right? They're like, hey, you're not a liability to us out there, like you're on your own. And so I go in, I get my shoes, I make the purchase, I come out, and I'm walking out with the bag, and I feel like, y'all know what, like, oh man, it's like this, like cloud nine, right? Like you have reached the pinnacle of your life. It's not that, but that's what the feeling is, right? You're like, man, I've achieved so much in this moment. I'm like, celebrate this great victory. I walk out the door, and then I hear over my shoulder, hey, Mr. Potter, right? And I'm like, okay, I look back, and it's a 16-year-old boy that I know. Like his little brother played baseball with my son, so we were travel ball families, always at the ball field together. And he goes, hey, Mr. Potter, and I'm like, oh, what's up, Carson? And I said, what are you doing? Like, it's 8:30 on a Saturday. I was like, oh, you must have won the raffle. And he's like, yeah, I won the raffle too. I was like, awesome. I just got mine, headed out, I'm like chumming it up. And I was like, well, all right, man. He was like, you know what's funny? I actually won 2 pairs. And I was like, what? He was like, yeah, I won the raffle here and at another store. And I was like, well, that's not fair. I was like, you know how hard it is to win a raffle? I mean, there's thousands of names in this jar at every store. And like this kid won at two different raffles at 2 different stores. And so immediately my victory, right, was now like, hey, anybody want to buy some shoes? Like immediately I was like, I don't care about this anymore. This is stupid. Anybody can relate to that, right? You have a great victory, and then you see what somebody else has got, and then all of a sudden your victory doesn't seem so great. So it was the comparison in the moment stole something from me, stole the joy that I had, right? Just comparing with like this 16-year-old young man who was just so happy, just as happy as I was 5 minutes ago. And so I find myself in the mall parking lot going, like this whoop-de-doo, right? Like immediately my whole, like all the joy was just, pew. Y'all know what I'm saying? Anybody been there? Maybe not with shoes, but you've been in that place before where you just like, you have this great thing, or you kind of find yourself living a life that is dependent on something else, an outside thing. And so in this moment, I kind of had this standing in the mall parking lot, holding these shoes, watching Carson go in and get his second pair, right? I had this moment, and it was like, the question was kind of like, in retrospect, I was kind of like, why does it feel so bad to gauge ourselves based on somebody else's life? Like, why does that hurt so bad? And so today we're just going to talk about what that feels like, what that is, and how we can deal with that. And so look at your neighbor and just say, the word comparison. Okay? The word comparison. Because the truth of the matter, the point of that story is that, and I told you it affects us all, is that we all want to measure up. Right? Anybody in here, feel free to raise your hand if you're bold enough to say you don't struggle with that.
We don't? Or we do?
That you don't struggle with that. Raise your hand if you do not struggle with measuring up. Okay, that's what I thought. So here's, and I mentioned this, I kind of mentioned, hey, I heard a voice from over my shoulder, right? And so what's the thing that drives us to always kind of follow that, like looking over our shoulder, looking around, instead of just staying focused on kind of what we want, right? So there's a couple different types of people. The first person is the person that's always looking for the Y'all know what the is? Anybody know what the is? Look at your neighbor, okay? Your least favorite neighbor, and say, have you seen the Okay? The is the capital ER at the end of the word, right? She's pretty He's tall He has better things, right? Whatever the is for you, stronger, faster, whatever that is, there's a group of people they're always looking for the right? And so I think that applies to everybody. I think we all kind of maybe have that thing. But then there's another level to that. There's another person it's beyond that. Like the is never enough. So now this person's looking for the est. You know what I mean? The capital EST at the end of it. So it's not good to be richer. Now I got to be richest. It's not good to be the faster than that person. Now I have to be the fastest among people. Okay? So, or the smartest, or whatever, your application fits. So we have the ers and we have the est. And then there's a third person who it's not so much about being or est, but it's more about as long as you're less than I am, then I can feel good about myself. So it's not about, I'm not going to strive to be or est. It's I'm just going to find a group of people that are less than me, and then I look better. Y'all feel me? Y'all know what I'm talking about? We might be these people, we might know these people, but these people are all around us, all in our lives. And so that's the three types of people. And while we know it's not right, it just feels good to be better than someone else, or at least in our mind, we feel better, right? In our heart, we feel better. And so we surround ourselves with scenarios and things and people that make us feel better. And so we're going to look in the book of Ecclesiastes. So if you got your Bible, I want you to open it and actually read the Bible with me, okay? We're going to put it on the screens for everybody that's logged online and people on YouTube later. But if you're in the room and you've got your Bible, I want you to use it, okay? If you don't have your Bible and you've got your phone, go ahead and open up your app and follow along, because I want you to read the words that Solomon, the wisest man on the planet of all time, the words that Solomon's going to reveal to us here, okay? So we're going to be in chapter 4. I'm going to set this up a little bit. There's a famous chapter 3. You've all heard it before. Solomon says, hey, in our lives, there's a season for everything, right? There's a season for this. There's a season for that, this. And he kind of goes along this chain of things of like, hey, timing, and there's seasons of life. Well, then he comes right out of that, and he's teaching this lesson. And then we get into chapter 4, and he starts off and he says, I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place. And so he recognizes that people are struggling with something. Okay? As we look around our world, today I think we can look around and go, hey, look, we are struggling. There's some oppression of a sort, and this oppression that I see is the oppression, or the thing that we struggle with is comparison and just competing with people, right? So Solomon says, this is chapter 4. We're going to start in verse 4. He says, I saw that all labor and all achievement spring from man's envy of his neighbor. Okay, I'm going to read that again. I looked around, I saw that all labor, achievement spring from man's envy of his neighbor. Okay, there's another version of that I want to, it's got a little different language I want to read. It says, then I observed that most people are motivated to success because they envy their neighbors. So I think we have to kind of look at this and go, Solomon's saying, hey, I've been watching people, and the thing that's driving their behavior, the reason people are acting the way that they're acting is simply just competition and comparison. Everybody's looking around, looking over their shoulders, wondering what people are doing, what they're driving, what they're wearing, and all they are driven by is what they see other people doing. He says, he looks and he's like, these people are determining who they are based on who everyone else is. And I think that's the trap that we find ourselves in, sometimes the tough spot. And we maybe don't even recognize it, but we look around and we go, because that person is this, fill in the blank, I must become that. So it's a if this, then that, and that formula never works in the world of comparison. He goes on again right at the end of this, and he says, this too is meaningless. It's like chasing after the wind. Have you ever seen anybody chase the wind? You go to like these music festivals, you see people and it looks like they're chasing the wind, right? Yeah, some of y'all get that later. It looks ridiculous, right? If you actually saw somebody out, you drove through your neighborhood and you saw somebody out in the front yard chasing the wind, you would be like, oh my gosh, this person has lost their mind, right? It looks ridiculous. But Solomon's saying not only does it look ridiculous, but it's pointless. You can't catch the wind, right? It's absolutely pointless. And so what he's telling us is that comparison is just like chasing the wind. It's pointless. You're not going to catch up. You're never going to measure up that way. So he goes on, verse 7 and 8. He says, I observed yet another example of something meaningless. This is the case of a man who's all alone without a child or a brother, yet who works hard to gain as much wealth as he can. But then he asked himself, who am I even working for? Why am I even doing this? Why is it that I can't stop and enjoy what I've spent my life getting? What am I really doing this for? What's driving me? And so there's this thing that Solomon's teaching us, that we have this desire for success, but it's all not based on what our heart is telling us is success. It's not based on what God is teaching us is success. What he's noticing is the same thing that we notice if we look around our world, is that people think that success is getting to a level that somebody else is at. If I can just make it to where he's at, then I'll be successful. If I can just make it to what she does, then I'll be successful. And that's how we live our life in our current society. But look, over 3,000 years ago, it was the same thing. Why can't we fix it? Why are we still struggling with this? So Solomon's just reminding people, he's actually teaching people, he's saying, look, we're in a place where we're taking our cues from our people on our left, people on our right, over our shoulder, people that we can and can't see. Like, we're taking cues about our life from these other people, and we're comparing ourselves with them and competing with them in hopes of measuring up to them. And so he wraps it up right here. He says, verse 8, it is all so meaningless and depressing. And when we look around our world, depression's an issue. Would you agree? Everybody agree with that? And I think one of the main things driving that is this thing inside of us that makes us feel like we have to measure up to some standard that God didn't ask us to live up to this thing. We decided, hey, like that looks prettier, I'm gonna go after that. And so we've set a standard for ourselves that we necessarily maybe not can never live up to, right? You may not be able to reach it. And so the first thing I want you to kind of write down or remember is that trying to measure up brings us down. Okay, very simple. But Solomon says that. He wraps it up in Ecclesiastes right there in this section and goes, hey, look, just simplified, our version of that is it's meaningless and it's depressing. Trying to measure up brings us down. And it's because it's impossible. Okay? Because even if you are more, fill in the blank, than the person next to you, there's always going to be somebody else that's more, fill in the blank, than you. Am I right? Right when you get out of the mall and you get that pair of shoes that you've always kind of wanted, within 30 seconds, you see somebody that goes, hey, guess what? I got 2 pairs. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's not fair. No, that's perfectly fair. But we go, no, it's not fair. I'm the victim here. They got more than me. So what have you really ever gotten? This is just an introspective kind of question. What have you really ever gotten more of by comparing yourself to other people? What have you ever gotten more of? Here's some answers. More insecurity, more worry, more discouragement, more distraction, more bad decision making, and more bad moods. Just another example that trying to measure up always just brings us down. And so it's like chasing the wind. It's meaningless. It sets you up to never enjoy your successes and to be even more miserable in your failures. And so, like I said, we struggled with this for 3,000 plus years, but there is a solution. There's absolutely a solution. So how do we still struggle with this? Well, here's the solution. We have to start with the question, who or what am I going to look at to tell me if I measure up? Because we're not going to stop comparing ourselves. We're not going to stop trying to measure up. The thing is we're using the wrong thing to measure up against. So we've got to pinpoint, what can I use to measure up to? Because we're not going to change our behavior. So we can change the tool that gives us this information. And so we're always going to look at something. So I'm going to use an illustration here. Everybody's going to relate to this. Anybody ever encountered a mirror? Okay. Does anybody not know what a mirror is? Okay, we're good. Okay. So everybody's encountered a mirror, right? And maybe you pass one and you look at it. Maybe you have a full length one that you walk by. Maybe you have just a shoe mirror. that you look at and just see your shoes on the way by? Some people got those, right? I don't. But some people have those. But we walk by them and we go, okay, everything looks okay, right? Hair's in place, everything looks good. And then we go on about our day, right? We all have these people or these things in our lives that we look at to tell us if we're okay. So we all have these mirrors that we've chosen to be the mirror in our life. And maybe it's a person for you, and you look at that person and you go, okay. And maybe they don't say, hey, you're okay. Maybe they never verbally say that to you. But what happens is that their actions, right, the way that they live their life is validating you. And you're finding your validation in what other people think of you and how people respond to you and how people act towards you, right? And so it either validates you or it discredits who you are in your mind. If I don't live up to that person's standard, if I don't see in the mirror and everything's okay, then I'm not who I thought I was. I'm not good enough. I don't measure up. And so no matter what people have, who they know, what they drive, what kind of, restaurants they go to, what kind of vacations they go on, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, those people still wonder if they're okay. And they have a mirror too. And so what you're doing is you're looking at a mirror and going, man, I need Stephanie to just give me something to let me know I'm okay. Well, guess what Stephanie's also doing? She's looking at somebody else going, I need to know if I'm okay. Right? And so we all have these mirrors in our lives. But what if every day when you were tempted to say, I wish I were as smart as, I wish I were as strong as, I wish I was as fast or as pretty or rich or whatever as, what if when you thought that, because we all do, what if you just stopped and said, no, I'm not going to do this because one, trying to measure up always brings me down, right? What if you just said, no, I want to see myself the way that God sees me? Okay, what if that was the way we started the day? So this is what I call changing the cue, okay? So Justin Barnett, you guys know how this works. Comes up, him or Lindsay or maybe Stephanie or somebody from the worship team usually comes up and plays the keys at the end of a message, right? And what you guys don't know is kind of behind the scenes. We're like, hey, there might be a moment here where it would be good for you to kind of come up. Some of y'all may think, wow, he just walks up when he wants to. Sometimes it's like you may wonder, wow, is it like a certain time or how do they know? How does he know when to do it? Well, like today, I sent him a message and say, hey, here's a good moment that I think this would be a good time, as we kind of wrap things up, might be good to come up and play the keys. And so I sent him a cue, right? I sent him a cue for the keys. And so right now I'm going to change the cue. And so, do you mind? Okay. So he was waiting on something that's happening later, right? And we'll get there. But I set him up today because there's something that we have to do in our lives. We have to change the cue, right? And so just like I did just then, I said, hey, I'm changing the cue right now. I'm going to do something different than what you thought we were doing. And so he was looking for a cue. He's looking for a set of scriptures that I sent him in a text. I just said, hey, after this, come on up. And so as we change the cue, this is the same thing because we look at the mirror of our lives, whatever it may be, whoever it may be, and we go, yeah, if I can just be that guy, if I can just be that lady, if I can just do this, do that, be be whatever, if I can just, then I'll be okay. I feel like I measure up. But when we change the cue and we go, you know what, God, I just want to see myself the way that you see me. There's a different response that we get because what happens when you look at your neighbor and you go, man, if my yard was as nice as his, what does your neighbor do? He sees you working on your yard. He sees you trying to compete. What's he going to do? He's going to call in the big guns, right? Now he's hired somebody to come spray his grass green. How you going to compete with that? It's fake, right? You just spray painting the grass, right? Then that person's always going to find, they're always going to, they're looking at somebody too, right? So it's just this constant thing. But what if instead of all that, we just said, hey, God, I want to see myself the way that you see me. And I think if we can change that cue, I think we get a different response. I think, because I've experienced this, I think what we hear God say, hey, I want you to know that you're fine. you're okay because you're mine. Like, and that's all it is to it. Like, we look for the you're okay, you've made it. And if we just change the cue, we actually get the thing that we were desiring the whole time. But now it's coming from a different place. It's not coming from my neighbor. Right? It's coming from my Father. And that's the approval we're all looking for anyways. And so if we can compare ourselves to that rather than this other thing or the person over our shoulder or whatever, that's how we can get to the point where we feel like we're good enough. We feel like we measure up. So if we know that trying to measure up always brings us down, we can change the cue, right? The second thing we have to know is, in relation to this, is we need to learn how to take the cue, right? Take the cue from the one who made you. Take the cue that God is a creator. He created you a certain way, and he put certain things in you for a reason, and he designed you to live a certain type of life. And he designed everybody differently. He put the different people in people's lives. He put different things in our lives. He allows us different opportunities to reach new levels for us, not for the audience around us. But we have to change the cue, because what we're doing is we're taking our cues from other people. This is what Solomon noticed. Is like, hey, everybody around is taking a cue about themselves from other people. This is the man of great wisdom reminding us that we shouldn't do that. So we need to take our cues about us from the one who made us. And so here's a couple of questions. Who or what do you look to when you need to know whether you're okay and measure up? Okay, if you're just looking for some like introspective, like, how can I do this? I got my journal out. I need some way to do this week. Just write that question down. Who or what do I look to when I need to know whether I'm okay and whether I measure up? Right? This is how you understand what's the mirror in your life. And you have to be brutally honest with yourself and go, oh, well, it's the lady in the cubicle next to me. And you have to be honest with yourself to understand that and go, why am I trying to compete with her? Why am I comparing myself to her? And then the second part of that question is, how much time do you spend thinking about it? Because I guarantee you, when you see the mirror, you're spending too much time looking in the mirror. Everybody knows that person, right? Right? Anybody go to like a regular like big gym and work out, exercise? Hey, I know the keys are going, but y'all can still interact, okay? We're not done. This is just part of it, okay? Anybody go to the gym? Y'all know they got mirrors all the way around? Y'all experienced this? Okay, some of you, none of us do this, I know, all right? I'm speaking to, this is not us, right? But when you go to the gym, because you don't do this, right? You're there to get an exercise, and you're in and out in 30 to 45 minutes. You're not spending 2 hours at the gym, right? Okay. So when you go, hopefully you notice this, I do, is there's always somebody that spends more time looking at themselves in the mirror than they do actually lifting the weights or rowing the rower or riding the bike or running on the treadmill, right? They're there for 3 hours, but 30 minutes of that is a workout. Right? It's funny, but it's true. Anybody that's been to the gym knows this. Okay? They spend too much time looking in the mirror. So we got to take our cue about us from the one who made us. Okay, so Matthew 25. This is the actual cue. Okay, this was the original cue. Matthew 25. This is a story that I'm not going to read the entire thing. It's the story that Jesus is telling us, the parable of the talents. And he says, basically, he gives this long story of how there's a servant and there's a master. Okay, I'm going to read part of it to kind of help you. It says, and you know what? I'm just going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read the whole thing. It says, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last. He divided it in proportion to their abilities. Very important. He then left on the trip. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling the small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. The servant who had received the 2 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more. The master said, Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling the small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money. So I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back. But the master replied, You wicked and lazy servant. If you knew that I harvested crops and I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. And then he ordered, Take the money from this servant, give it to the one with the 10 bags of silver. And then we get to the point of this parable. It says, To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's a strong ending to that story. And so the question to me when I read stuff like that is like, how does that apply to me? What's Jesus saying to me right now in this story? And I think the takeaway in that applies to us today is what you have matters far less than what you do with what you have. What you have matters far less than what you do with what you have. So I think we get caught in this thing of like, oh, I need more. I need more. I need more. I need greater. I need est. Oh, I just need to surround myself with people that are less than me to make me look better. And Jesus is saying, no, like the more is not attached to the quantity of what you have. It's more attached to the quality of what you do with what you do have. And so everybody has this thing in your house probably, okay? Everybody's got a bookshelf, I'm sure. Some sort of shelf with things on it, right? So if we look at our lives, we look at ourselves and we go, look, on my bookshelf is a certain, which rarely have books on them, by the way. We usually put other things on bookshelves. They're called bookshelves. Anyways, maybe you got some things on your shelf, right? We all have this shelf. But you've got a certain set of gifts and abilities and some talents. Okay, this is the parable of the talents. In this case, they're talking about silver. But you have a certain set of talents on your shelf. And a lot of us have this shelf that has various different types of talents. And no one's shelf looks like your shelf. Would you agree with that? We all have different talents, different gifts. But what I know is that what's on the shelf is not near as important as what I do with what's on the shelf. Because what happens if you just got things on your shelf and you never do anything with them? What happens? They just collect dust. They just get old. They dry rot, right? Things that don't get use actually have sometimes a shorter lifespan than the things that do get used because they just sit there and there's nothing happening with them. So it's we kind of learn with our shelf, it's a waste of time to complain about what we have and what we don't have, right? Because what you have on your shelf is exactly what you need in order to do something spectacular. God's given you something and put it on your shelf. Instead of looking around at like, oh, what do they have? What's on their shelf? Oh, they got something cool. Like, yeah. You're missing out on the opportunity to do something spectacular in God's kingdom with what he's giving you already. And so what you do with what you have matters way more than what you actually have. So here's some questions, or maybe some thoughts that you maybe can relate to. How faithful are you with what you've actually been trusted with? How faithful are you with what's on your shelf? Maybe you're not as rich as your cousin. Maybe you're not as skinny as your 3 best friends. Maybe you can't jump as high or run as fast as your teammate. Maybe you can't bake like your grandmother bakes. Maybe you don't communicate like they do. Maybe your marriage isn't where theirs is. Maybe your finances aren't where theirs are. Maybe your kids don't behave like theirs do. Common denominator in all of that is the word theirs or his or hers, right? So the absolute best case scenario of your life depends less on your gifts and talents and resources, and it really kind of depends more on how you use these things. And so it's all about how you apply yourself. So look at your neighbor. This time pick your favorite one and say, the world needs you to apply yourself. So here's a couple of takeaways from what Solomon says about this, about how we can apply ourselves, okay? Jesus in that parable, he says, each time the servant reports back and the master says, hey, how good, my good and faithful servant, and they celebrate it together, right? So that's one thing we don't do. We don't celebrate our gifts. We don't celebrate what's on our shelf. And we really don't celebrate what other people have. And that's the first mistake we make, right? So celebrate what others have. Second thing we can do is use what God's given you. This is where we have to apply our shelf. Take what's on our shelf, put it to use. So we're going to celebrate what somebody else has. We're not going to compare and go, you know what, I wish you didn't have that. We're going to celebrate that. We're going to then look at our shelf and go, I need to use some of this. I have gifts and talents over here that the world needs. I need to use that. Then we're going to maximize the gift. We're going to maximize the thing that's on our shelf. We're going to take it and optimize it and use it really, really well. Find better ways to use that gift. Find the right places to use that gift. Figure out how we can use that gift in God's kingdom. If you have the gift of resource and finance, there's a way for you to maximize that in God's kingdom. If you have the gift of speaking and communicating, there's a way for you to maximize and use that gift to bring God glory. But we've got to celebrate what other people have, not compare, but celebrate. Then we have to use what God's given us. Then we have to maximize it, and ultimately what we experience is a multiplication. Now our gifts begin to multiply. God says, hey, I've seen you do with the little thing that I gave you, and now I can make it I can make that thing or I can make it est. But it's not our desire to become that anymore. Now it's our desire to use the thing that he's already given us, right? To be content with what we have and go, you know what, I'm going to maximize this thing because I know God promises that if I do that, he will bless me with more. It's all through Scripture. So the alternative to spending the rest of our life looking to the left, looking to the right, looking over our shoulder, wondering if we measure up, this is the alternative. Apply the shelf. We have to just celebrate, multiply, max, all these things, right? This is the alternative. This is the solution to the problem that the world faces. Instead of celebrating each other, we look for ways to make you less than me. We don't apply the things that we've been given. It boils down to we ask ourselves the wrong questions. We ask ourselves the question, hey, today is Monday. I'm going into the workplace today. How can I possibly measure up? What can I do today to prove myself to that person? What can I do today to get someone's approval or to reach a level of satisfaction? How can I interact with people? What can I do today to earn more and to be better? All these things, be better than somebody else, right? I want to be the employee of the month. Yeah, sure, that's a great goal. But we can't wake up in the morning and go, what am I going to do today to become the employee of the month? You just become the employee of the month. So we're asking ourselves the wrong question. We ask the question, how do I measure up? The real questions we should be asking, number one, is we should wake up and go, who am I today? That should be the first question we ask every day. Who am I? God, who do you say that I am? I'm looking in the mirror, but I'm not looking in that old mirror, right? I'm comparing myself to the image that God created me to be. Who am I? Okay? I have some work to do. That's fine. None of us have reached that point where I don't know that I've reached the point in my life where God has said, my good and faithful servant, just yet. So that means I still have some things that I can work on. I still have some improvement inside of myself to become the version of myself that God can go, here's more. Here's more, here's more, here's more. And I believe we all want that, don't we? Yes, we all do. You all said it at the very beginning. Everybody raised their hand and said yes. So we ask ourselves, who am I? Why am I here? Right? Why did God put you here? You have a certain set of gifts that I don't have. Everybody in this room has a gift that I don't have. Maybe I have something that you don't have, but we're all here for a reason. We're all here together in this place specifically for a reason, a purpose. So we just have to ask ourselves, okay, now that I've looked in the mirror, why am I here? What's my purpose? And when we get these answers, we start asking more questions, different questions. So then we understand who we are. We know why we're here. We know what our purpose is. Now we have to look around and go, okay, what's available to me that I'm not accessing just yet? I know who I am. I know why I'm here. But there's something that I'm not accessing yet because I believed it's something different about myself. So now I want to maximize my gift. I want to multiply things in my life, right? I want to see God do more with the little that I have. And I want him to trust me with more. But we have to look around and go, what's available? What's out there that's available to me? And then the final question we have to ask is, what am I willing to do with it once I get it? And this is where you can apply yourself. What am I willing to do once I get the thing? Once I reach that level that God goes, okay, like my good and faithful servant, you've done well with this. Here's some more. What are you willing to do with it? This is the place we get to when we feel like we just have to keep things and I'm just going to hang on to it. But there's a lot of ways that we can actually do something with the things God's given us. I'm not going to go into a whole thing on how you should do that, how you should use your gift. I think the first question we have to ask is like, God, why am I here? You tell me who I am. I see that in the mirror, but why am I here? And he's going to probably tell you, look, you've got a certain set of skills and a certain set of gifts that I need you to do something with. And then you engage that conversation with him, and he will lead you to the point where you start to look and see what's available around you. Instead of looking around you going, I just need to be more like that guy. Y'all tracking? So just know this is something that we all struggle with. I struggle with it. People every day. I struggle less with it now than I used to, but it's still there, right? It's human nature and it's our society and the way we look around at things and we see people's social media and you scroll through and you see something and you go, oh, that would be cool to have. I want one of those. And now all of a sudden we've set our day on looking to try to get that thing, whatever it is, to be like that person instead of just kind of staying focused on like what God's called me to be, what he's called me to do, the gifts he's called me to use, and how he's called me to use them. And so I think that's our challenge for today. As we go forward, we're not going to end with a big invitation or anything like that. I'm just going to kind of leave you with it. I'm going to pray for us, and then we're going to get out of here, and we're going to go apply ourselves. Right? I didn't slip. So God, we thank you for today. God, I thank you for each person in this room. I thank you for the gift inside of each of them and the purpose that you've called them to inside of your kingdom. And God, I pray right now that each person has the courage to ask themselves what or who it is that they're trying to stack themselves up against. Who are they using as a measuring stick? God, would you bring that name to mind? Would you bring that face to mind? Would you allow us to see that image of that person or that thing? And God, as we leave here today, I pray that you would instead of that image that we see when we ask that question, God, I pray that we see your face. I pray that we see your heart. I pray that we chase after the things that you've called us to chase after and not what our neighbor's chasing. God, I pray that we can apply the things that you've given us, the gifts, the talents, the resources, God, first of all, to your kingdom, because we know if we do that well, you will bless us with more. Will become a real thing in our life. Est may become a real thing in our life, and we won't have to compare ourselves to the people around us. So God, we love you. We thank you for being the mirror in our lives. God, we pray that we would just go today and bless people around us. As we grow closer to you, we pray that we draw other people in as well. We love you. It's in Jesus' name. Amen.